the lead up to the 2024 general elections, growing debate around what impact the outcomes at the polls will have on South Africa's economic outlook, while Northwest University's Policy Uncertainty Index finds that the political dynamics in the lead up to the polls is edging closer to negative territory and have started to weigh on investor confidence and financial markets. This is despite the country's economy being forecast to grow at an average of 1.6%. The World Bank in South Africa believes it remains a dual economy with one of the highest and most persistent inequality rates in the world. Development economist and CEO at the Frontline Group, Dr. Jason Musyoka, gives us his perspective. Dr. Musyoka, welcome to the Weekend Report and thank you for your time. Before we get into the outlook of South Africa's Policy Uncertainty Index, first let's talk about the current economic climate, especially pertaining to the fact that we have one of the highest inequality rates in the world.
Yeah, indeed. And I think that if you look at the history, just the short history of South Africa's growth, it's been really troubling, particularly for the last decade. This is particularly if you, again, consider that in the early 2000s, there was a soaring growth of up to 5%, but then enter 2008. And there are, of course, domestic issues, constraints that we've dealt with, but also global shocks like your financial crisis, and then we had COVID-19, and there were national droughts as well that we experienced, and then, of course, Russian-Ukraine conflict. But those have been coupled with our own domestic issues, which relate to institutional management and, state capture. And those have really ground the growth to a halt, where if you look at the growth between 2010 and about 2019, you are looking at almost 0.8%, which is significantly worrying.
All right. So let's talk about now the South Africa's Policy Uncertainty Index. For the uninitiated, what is it, first and foremost?
So I think partly the history of any economy in the world is that when you get closer to elections, what really happens is that the markets are very jittery and investors are not very keen to invest because you're not quite sure what is going to happen beyond the elections. If a new party comes to power, then you're likely to have changing policies. And investors like to wait until there is more certainty around that. South Africa has been different because the structure of the political institutions is such that the ANC has been dominant. So uncertainty has never really been a major problem, at least since 1994, because it's very predictable that the ANC is going to win. Except that now, for the first time, we really are looking at a situation where it's uncertain. Suddenly the ANC is going to lose or fall below 50%. That's what most opinion polls demonstrate. So you really are facing not just political uncertainty here, but also economic uncertainty, because if coalitions come to power, then you get into policy modifications and changes. So for the first time since 1994, we really are facing uncertainties that we haven't really seen since then.
Talk to me about how this survey was done. How do you measure policy uncertainty?
So policy, it really matters, for example, who comes to power. We know which party stands for which particular policies. If it's EFF, for example, we know their general stance on policies, whether it's land, whether it's other national assets. The ANC, we also are quite aware of, for example, what kinds of policies it would advance. If the ANC still dominates, it's likely to continue the same policies that currently are. The DA also has its own particular set of policies. So these issues have to do a lot with ideological persuasions of the parties. Uncertainty is where we are now not sure which party will really come to power or how the coalitions are going to form. Suddenly we are in the era of coalitions in South Africa, at least since the last elections. So that creates uncertainty because, for example, whether it's tax brackets, we don't know whether who comes to power, how that is going to change. Social safety nets, for example, if another party comes to power, are we still going to see the extension of the COVID-19 relief social safety net, for example? So those are the questions of uncertainty because we are not sure which party is going to dominate. We are going to enter certainly into coalitions.
Doctor, let's expand a little bit more on the impact of the outcomes of the 2024 general elections.
So I think with that, what you are likely to see, firstly, because there has been some few reforms that are ongoing in several sectors, you are looking particularly at infrastructure, in energy as well, logistics. There are some of those reforms that have been implemented. They have, however, been extremely slow. And the problem is that depending on, again, how the coalitions form, if after the elections, you are likely to see even a much slower process of reforms. A good example is the electricity crisis that we've really faced from 2008. One of the reasons why it's recurred almost 20 years on is because of the slow reforms. And that is when you have a clear government in power. When you have coalitions, what really happens is that these reforms are likely to slow down. The more they slow down, the more they slow the productivity of the economy itself. And I think that is one of the major crises that we've been facing as a country. It's a lack of productivity, and our economy is not producing what it should be producing. So if we have much slower or decelerated reforms, then, of course, we are going to see even a more protracted, slow or stagnating growth.
And what impact have the current political dynamics have had on the economy?
So I think with unfortunately now when you're running into the campaigns and elections and so on, what you have clearly seen, even before we got into the campaigning process, has been internal political crisis that has created, or there's really not much performance of the state itself. And I think one of the challenges that we have faced over time is the fact that the state failure, the failure of the state has been a long time coming. And now with that, regardless of who comes to power and so on, and even now the period, the fact is that you have a state that is not able to deliver basic services. It's not able to do its very basic functions. So I think with that, unfortunately, even with the elections, we are really now on the back of campaigning and looking for who is going to govern, while the state itself has suffered. And I think the difference needs to be made here between political parties or the political space and the state itself. Those are really two different categories. But with the way politics have been mismanaged, they have rendered the state itself totally unable to deliver on its contract to the citizenry.
Thank you so much for your time, Doctor. We'll wait for the 29 May elections. It remains to be seen. That was development economist and CEO at the Frontline Group, Dr. Jason Musyoka.